In this video, we will discover the properties editor here. So we will have a lot to discover into this one, so the properties here. You can see that you have subtabs here, and you can choose what you will manage with these tabs. So these little icons, you will have to recognize them after. And so we will start by the first one on the top here. The first one will give you the possibility to have more options into the tool that you are using. For now here you have a tool that just select by box like this. So it's a box select, okay? And you have different options for this box select. But if, for example, you choose to move the object here, okay, you have the possibility to move the object with different options. So for example, if I want to move it, if I make a rotation here, it will still move with the global axis here. But if I use, for example, the local axis, I can use the axis of my cube, okay? So those options, you will find them here. And in object mode, it's not that much important, but if you go in sculpt mode, for example, here, okay, you will really have more options with your tools. Like for example, if here I choose a crease tool, okay, I will have more actions here and settings to manage with this tool, okay? So this first one, it's a tool, like the little key and the little tool, so it's a tools. Here we come back into object mode. I'll do Alt R to remove the rotation here. And in the second here we will have the render engine settings. What is a render engine? A render engine is the algorithm, the software, let's say a little piece of software that will compute how to take the photography with the camera and the light, and how the lights interact with the object and give the feedback to the camera and everything. So here by default it's Eevee, but you have three different options here, the workbench and the cycles. So here if I go with Eevee render engine, and then I make a F12 to make a render, you can see that it goes very quick, and that I have my cube appears very quick like that. Eevee, it's a kind of it's a render engine similar from what you will have into game engines like Unity or other game engines like that. Okay, and here the second one that I will show you here, it's cycles. Cycles, it's more for realistic results. So as you can see, when I do F12, it takes more time to compute. But if you have more complex scenes with shadows and different lights and everything, it will give something really more photorealistic than that one. So you can see, you can say already, this one is for quick render, not really realistic but quick, and this one is really for realistic rendering. And what is good with these two, it's that usually the settings that you put in one with the lights and the shaders and everything will be compatible with the other, okay? Workbench here, it's just a kind of duplication of the options that you have here, okay? And it will just give you a quick render of what you have in the viewport like that. So if you go into render view here and manage your viewport like we did for a madcap, for example, and maybe give some shadow and cavity, you will just make an F12 and it will give the result of what you have into the 3D viewport like that, okay? So the three options here, Eevee for a quick render, let's say, cycles for not fast render, but at least really realistic, and for the workbench, it works exactly the same as the 3D viewport, okay? So this tab here is the render settings here. Into this one, we will manage the scene option. So it will be, it's a little printer here to say, to say that here we will manage the resolution of the image that we will render. So by default it's a full HD, but you can manage that as you want here. You have different presets here for what you need, okay? And you can manage the aspect of the image, but usually we don't touch this. Here you have the number of frames into the animation, the frame rate that you can manage too. And into the output section, this one is important. You can manage here the possibility to say where you want to render your animation. If you render an animation, so you will choose a folder where to render your animation. You can choose here if you want, for example, to render what kind of format. Okay, here it will be a PNG with RGBA by default, so it will render full color and alpha values. Alpha values is transparency outside the object. So let's say if I go here to cycles, for example, I go to film and I enable transparent, okay, and I make a render of this with F12. As you can see around Suzanne here, around my little monkey, I will have transparency. So I can put a background after in other 2D softwares or things like that, or with the compositor of Blender, we can put a background by using the transparency around Suzanne like that. Okay, so it can be useful, and it will work only if you use PNG, not JPEG, because JPEG doesn't have an alpha value. Okay, and so the first here, the images file format, but you have the movies file formats too. Well, this is for render animation for sure. Metadata post-processing, we will not manage it for now, and stereoscopy, we will not use it during the training. Here for the layers, you can see that for cycles you have a ton of options. If, for example, you go with Eevee, you don't have that much options here. Okay, so let's keep cycles to show you this, and you have the possibility to enable different paths into Blender, and like that after you can compose your image. So if you want to put more glossy, or if you want to put more shadow or more emission into your scene, you can manage this with the compositor after, but we will see this more into the compositing chapter. It will be the last chapter of our training, compositing. So here you have the scene, and in the scene what is important is here the units. You can manage the unit system of Blender. By default it's metric. Okay, so one little square like that is 1 meter, but you can manage this differently. For example, you have the possibility to choose imperial here, and the length will be a feet or inches, okay, as you want. But if you come back to the metric system here, you have the possibility to manage kilometers, meters, centimeters as you want. So it depends what you want to model. If you model a house, for example, for sure you will use meters, but if you model a more little object, it will be millimeters or centimeters. So here you have the possibility to manage the unit, and it's important one. And here you have the gravity. So it will manage it will be important for the simulation, but we will have a full chapter for the simulation, so we will come back to it after. And for the keying sets, the audio and the rigid body world, for now we don't touch this. Okay, so here remember in the scene what is important is the unit and the gravity that you can manage. The world here, it's what's behind Suzanne, okay, and what gives kind of ambient lighting to the scene. So let's say, for example, if I come back with my non-transparent value with cycles, I will remove the transparency into my image. So like that, I will have the full gray color outside Suzanne, like that. I do escape just to show you that. And here, if you just change the color and the intensity of the light, like for example, if I put maybe not 20 but 2, and with kind of orangey light like this, you will have the scene that will be different. As you can see, the complete the complete background will light the scene and Suzanne as well, okay? But if I put everything in black, it will be totally dark and only the light will have an influence on Suzanne. So all the other side of Suzanne is totally hidden in the dark like that, okay? So here you can manage the world. Sure, we will add more options to this during the training. We will add some textures into it to give a kind of ambient light like that. That will be very interesting for the lighting environment like that. You have the possibility to enable ambient occlusion if you want, but this is not really useful for now. The volume, we don't use it for now too. Okay, so here it's the world and the little planet here, and it represents what is outside the scene like that. Here you have the transform options and where is your object, what is the rotation of the object, and what is the scale of your object. So let's say for example, if I move my object here like that, you can see that here the location X and Z did move, and here the Y as well. So it will be the same if I take the rotation here and make some rotation like that. Okay, you can see that here the values did change, and the same for the scale. If I choose the scale here and scale my object with different axes or the global axis like that, I will have different scale values. Okay, so there's values you can find it here. Okay, if you put everything at 0 back, you will have Suzanne and 1 for scale, not 0, because if you put 0 at scale, you will have a little point that is no geometry in the end. So here you will have Suzanne by default, okay? So you can find this. You can find the relationships between objects. For example, if I want to put a parent to Suzanne, it will rule Suzanne after. So let's say, for example, I add a mesh, a torus, okay? I will put this torus here. And if I say that the parent of Suzanne is the torus, then Suzanne will be ruled by the torus. So if I select only the torus and I move my object, everything will move. But if I take Suzanne only Suzanne will move, okay? And you can see the link between the two like that. So here you will have the relationships between the object, so kind of parent system, okay? Yeah, objects, they have relationships too. It's interesting. So sometimes it's parent, sometimes it's child, sometimes it's whatever. We have the collection system, and this is related to that one, and we will see how to manage the collections later. Okay. We have the instancing. For now, we will not touch this. The motion path, the motion blur, we will not touch it too. So here, really, you have all the options that are related to this object, okay? And if I take this object, for sure, you will have other informations. And if I take the lamp, you will have other informations too. Good. Then here you will have the modifiers. The modifiers, it's something interesting. So let's say I will remove this one, and I will focus on Suzanne with numpad period, just to have a look on Suzanne more. And the modifiers, it's little actions that you can add to your object that is non-destructive. So let's say you want to modify your Suzanne and you want to subdivide it and to make a kind of smooth into the surface. So you will do this, and as you can see, it did subdivide and did smooth the surface. If you put, for example, the subdivide at 2, you will have even a smoother surface. If you add a modifier here, another, let's say, and that you put an array, the array will duplicate Suzanne into an axis. And if you manage here the count, you will have different Suzannes that goes into the axis like that. So it's a very powerful system because nothing is destructive here. It's only some, let's say, like the FX into Photoshop, if you know Photoshop already. So you have some FX system like that. So it's a little the same system. It's totally non-destructive. You can still manage your modifiers after and come back to it, and it's related to one object only. So very, very powerful system, and we will have a full chapter about this because a lot of little tricks with these modifiers gives very, very nice results. Okay, so for that one we are good. Here we have the particle system, and if I put, for example, a particle system to Suzanne, so we'll have a full chapter about that too. If I just add a particle setting and manage here the play button, you will see the particles that goes out from Suzanne and go down with the gravity that is into this section here. If I remember, no, this section here, okay, the gravity, so it's negative 9.8 like the Earth, so it goes down like that. So just to show you how it works basically, but you can see that there are a lot of settings, and a full chapter, a big part of a chapter will be related to that. Here we have the physics, and it's everything that is related to simulation. Like for example, you can tell Suzanne to emit some smoke, or to become a fluid, or to become cloth, or everything that is here that is physics, or to become let's say rigid body, for example. So let's say very quick, like for example this one and this one, I will just duplicate my object here and add a cube here and scale it here. So the animation and simulation system is very simple with rigid body. So just an example for how it works. You will have a passive here, let's say, so it will receive the other objects, and these ones will be just rigid body active, okay? And after you let the animation do the job, and Blender will compute how it will interact like that itself. So this is everything with physics here and simulation, and a full chapter will be dedicated to that, okay? So I just do Ctrl-Z a few times to come back to my Suzanne by default, and here, now we can jump to the next tab. Where is this one? I put it here, okay? Here you have the constraint. So the constraint gives a kind of let's say constraint, yeah, it's a good word, to objects. And for example, I will limit the rotation of my object, or copy the rotation of another object here. We will have the possibility to make some follow path or floor, or a lot of things like that that are really interesting. And we will manage a few into an entire video. So here it's a constraint here. This one is really related to the kind of object you will have. So by default here it's the mesh, and you can see Suzanne is a mesh, so I will have some vertex groups, some shape keys, some UV maps, a lot of things that are related to meshes. But if I take for example the lamp here, I will have here the color of my lamp, the power of my lamp, the size of my lamp, all of these options here. If I want my lamp to be a sun, a spot, an area, or whatever. And if I select my camera here, I will have all the options of a real camera, like for example the focal length, here if it's millimeters or field of view, all of these options will be available here. And all the kind of objects here that you have in Blender will have a different menu here. Like for example here, if I add, for example, I don't know, a curve and move it here, a Bezier circle here, so you can see that it's a different menu compared to that one, different options, because a curve doesn't interact the same than a mesh. But if I add a mesh, for example, you can see that the options between Suzanne and the cube are exactly the same because they are meshes, okay? So we will have a look on these options with more details later. Here you have when an object can have a shader. It means when an object has a surface that will reflect the light and give informations to my camera. You will have the possibility here to add a shader to Suzanne or to the cube. and each shader will be related to the object. So it can be some in Blender the name of it is material, but in some other softwares it's shaders. So by default, if I add one here, it will be a material, and I can manage after a lot of things, like for example, if my shader is metallic, if it has a lot of reflections with the speculars and the roughness and everything. So after, when you go into rendered view, you can have a little understanding on how it will work with the light and everything, or it will interact. So if I make a full metallic one, it will be different, okay, and reflect the surface around. So a lot of options into this, and for these two we'll have a full chapter about it, because for now we just focus on global options. So I come back here, and the last one here will be the texture. And the texture can be related to a brush, like for example, if I use a texture to paint a texture of a brick, let's say, whatever, and I use this texture and I want to use this texture to paint, so I will use the brush here. But it can be related to the material too, if I want to add a texture into the material. So by default, it's more related to the brushes. And if I add a new texture here, it can be an image, but it can be clouds, it can be blend between two colors, it can be Musgrave, it can be marble. So you have a lot of textures that are available here. So we will have a look on this during the training too. So that's it here, and you can see a lot of parameters to manage here. So that's why it's important to learn well all these little icons and what they represent here. Like this, you will not have to search, okay, where are the modifiers? Okay, it's a little blue key, and you know it. Where I manage my image size, okay, it's a printer, it's here. When I manage my render engine, the first one, okay? And so you can, like this, just have a quicker interaction with this editor here. So that's it for this editor. In the next video, we will have a look on what will be the next video. We will have a look on how to manage Blender and with the configuration and here the user preferences.